when this caravan hit 4,000 people. I'm more hardline on immigration, or as a few commenters have said, more common sense. So don't be surprised when my solutions to this are A, not taking emotion or feelings into account, but also B, not trying to be malevolent or cause undue harm on anybody. So first things first, the caravan is no longer 4,000 people. It's not 5,000 like I said yesterday. It's now 7,000 and it's growing. They're currently right here near the border city between Guatemala and Mexico. Just 2 days ago, they were over here, and best case scenario in their world, they're going to head in through the Rio Grande Valley sector, which would be about 1,100 miles, even though I have a quote that I'll read here soon that talks a bit more about their trajectory. So they're just chugging along, getting help from local Mexicans, getting ferry rides across the border as they go past hundreds of Mexican authorities, mind you, just picking up more people as they go. And Mexican immigration authorities only processed 640 people to come through legally. First problem is that they let them through. Second problem is, like I just said, thousands were pouring in via the river and storming the Mexican bank illegally. But what are laws to these people? They're nothing but a barrier between what they want and what they see as being the easiest and arguably only way to get it. And to be clear, I don't care if it's the only way for them to get what they want. Not everyone gets to flock to America whenever they feel like it. If you're going to get into America by any means necessary, then we should use any means necessary to prevent it, including, as Trump has stated, with the force of the military. This really is a great tweet all around, though, because he also talks about stopping payment to the countries involved with this. The caravan has picked up the slogans of, "We're not criminals, we're workers, and if you send us back, we will return." Okay, so that second slogan, this sounds like a threat. If you reject us, we're coming back anyways. And if you enter a country illegally, then guess what that makes you? A criminal. America doesn't need you to work here. Go somewhere else. They could even stay in Mexico, and it'll be marginally better than Honduras, depending on where you stay in Mexico. And don't get me wrong, okay? I feel bad for the people in this caravan fleeing violence and poverty and corruption and coming to America for a legitimately better life. But the fact that other people are suffering independent of your own personal actions doesn't mean that you're forced to take on the burden. And America being connected to Mexico, and by an extension of that, Central and South America, doesn't mean for an instant that we're forced to deal with their problems. It's up to individual immigrants to meet the standard that America has set forth based on market demands, net immigration, and security concerns. That means if the demand to immigrate to America rises, then the price to come here rises. And of course, it's not a literal price in the way that people would typically think about it, but it is a price in a way because it's a measure of the value that you're projected to add to America. And as far as refugees from war-torn countries, it might break your heart, but if you can't accept them without guaranteeing at the very least the safety of your own citizens, then you can't accept them. And that's the middle ground approach. And even that seems extreme in today's modern political climate. But the true hardline approach from a more conservative libertarian perspective is that no matter what, you don't get to force the collective economic burden on all of your citizens. So what I'd imagine would happen is that a charity would step in and they'd allow people to donate, and then they'd either buy land or have land donated to them, and it would be to house the refugees that are here for a limited amount of time. But to even get to that point, it's up to the federal government to make sure that the proper paperwork is presented, it's verified, and it's approved. If that can't physically happen with refugees from a certain part of the world, then it's up to charity to take the money and the resources to them. And of course, dumping money on people from poorer countries doesn't work, but charities can do whatever they want as long as they're not deceiving people and violating someone's non-aggressive rights. So I guess to really To really wrap this immigration theory together here, it's the federal government's job to control the standard for immigration into the country, because the safety of the citizenry as a whole is inherently at stake. It's up to charities to take care of them once they're here, because contributing to a charity is voluntary. So you're not violating any non-aggressive rights. And the economic burden isn't inherently dumped on the entire citizenry. The only alternative to make this entirely charity funded would be to force charities to keep refugees separated from everyone else, because charities would be in charge of the vetting process and vetting people. And that would be a nightmare. And I mean, you couldn't possibly guarantee the actual safety of the citizenry. So government in charge of who comes in and who doesn't. Charities handle them once they're here. That's at least how I would do it, and what I see as being the best rational approach to all of that. So that was a little immigration philosophy, but now back to the story at hand. Caravan leaders have not defined the precise route or decided where on the US border they want to arrive. Okay, so big problem that I see right off the bat. Caravan leaders, they have leaders. They know who is leading this 7,000 plus person horde. And those people aren't being arrested for directing people how to break the law and then showing them how it's done. I mean, that's essentially what's going on here. There are people directing others how to break the law by showing them how to do it. I mean, the article bit that I just showed also mentioned how caravans in the past have fractured or splintered apart as they approach the US border, because some people choose to stay in Mexico, as I suggested earlier, and others attempt to cross the border on their own because, a giant horde flooding the border is a bit too obvious for some people. So border agents, military members, they need to watch out for those fracture groups and those individuals. Now, I mentioned earlier that it was roughly 1,100 miles from where they are now to the Rio Grande Valley sector, but it's about 1,600 miles to the Arizona-California border. So that 500 miles could make all the difference and cause them to shoot for Texas. But then Mexican President-elect AMLO has said that the US, Canada, and Mexico could work together for funding development in poorer countries. Except two things. One, that doesn't work. We've already poured hundreds of millions of dollars into funding these poor countries, and it gets nowhere because either US politicians who are corrupt end up in charge of the money, or the governments in these countries are corrupt and they just take the money. And two, I like how AMLO pretends like Mexico's actually going to be able to offer much in terms of funding these poorer countries' development. I mean, is he aware of his own struggling and corrupt and poverty-stricken country? I highly suggest he uses his own resources on his own citizens before diverting them to other countries. But AMLO also has said that people who leave their town don't leave out of pleasure, they leave out of necessity. And that's a loaded statement because no, there are plenty of people who leave their town in hope of a better life. It doesn't mean it's out of necessity. And just because someone wants to leave somewhere, or maybe is driven out by necessity, as AMLO suggests, that doesn't mean there needs to be a place that has to be forced to take them in. Plus, with Trump's threat to cut aid to Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico, I highly doubt that he'd agreed to AMLO's proposal. And finding the amount of aid that goes to these countries was really pretty difficult. Yahoo says it went from $209 billion in 2016 to almost $182 billion in 2017. First, that should be millions, not billions. But second, Yahoo directed me to the Washington office on Latin America. So I went over there, and this was the entirety of the first link that I clicked on. They say in both 2016 and 2017, the U.S. allocated around $432 million for Guatemala and $391 million for Honduras. But then I searched for the exact numbers that Yahoo used, and I found a Washington office on Latin America link that says Honduras received $181.7 million last year, not this year. So I'll link all this below, but regardless, it's well over $100 million just for Honduras. Combine that with Guatemala and Mexico, who, like the others, receives disputed amounts ranging from around 30 million up to 79 million. And suddenly Trump cutting aid to these countries seems great. It saves us huge amounts of money. And the argument that we should just keep pouring money into these countries so that they can continue to be corrupt makes no sense. It's not making them better. But in the wake of all of this chaos, Trump tweeted out that he's alerted Border Patrol and military that this is a national emergency, and there are unknown Middle Easterners mixed in. And while I'm reminded of it quick, Guatemala's largest newspaper, I mentioned this in the video yesterday, Guatemala's largest newspaper reported just 4 days before this caravan formed that 100 ISIS fighters had been arrested inside of the country. So keep that in mind. And there are also numerous videos showing migrants receiving cash, leading many people to think that there's outside funding. And while Brandon Darby of the Breitbart Cartel Chronicles has said that this is just how the cartel operates and it's not Soros, there are still questions left unanswered here. Trump has been cracking down on immigration for a long time, so why now are they forming and moving up towards the border? Like who keeps handing the immigrants money? I mean, it's not only people in the surrounding towns giving the caravan anything that they can afford. There are men handing out money, and I have a hard time believing that this is the cartel orchestrating all of this. I thought for a little while it was, but this would equate to the cartel paying the migrants, which makes no sense. And this video was taken from Trump's Twitter account. Also seen in the cluster of migrants were some burning the American flag with a swastika on it. I have a feeling that they really wouldn't know much at all about the actual Nazis, but clearly someone or something has been lying to them and indoctrinating them with the same misconceptions and beliefs and lies as the masses of the modern left in America. And one final point for this video, there's been about $800 million more spent on illegal immigrant births than Trump's wall. But of course, there's some issues with this article because it cites what was spent in 2014 before Trump was even a candidate for president. And the report mentions how even though illegals don't technically qualify for Medicaid, Medicaid will pay for the delivery and postpartum care for at least a few months in almost all cases if the mother's uninsured. So that's your tax dollars at work, helping the illegals here instead of keeping them out in the first place. I mean, a country can't function on loose borders and handouts. A country can't arguably function violating the non-aggressive rights of its citizens either. And I'd make the argument that violating one non-aggressive right creates a slippery slope leading to the violation of other non-aggressive rights. And it's partially how we ended up in the mess that we have now with taxes and sanctuary cities and the welfare state and the dumbed down education system, the dumbed down state-run education system. I mean, the government is responsible for the welfare of the citizens when that was never the original intention. They're supposed to promote the welfare of the citizenry, not protect it. It's an important distinction to make. So that's really all for this video. As more happens with this caravan heading up towards our border, I'll be sure to cover it. But